PLD Projects presents Holy Snokes, a Star Wars podcast featuring PLD and Matty Gunner. May the Force be with you, always. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to PLD Projects. Welcome back to Holy Snokes, a Star Wars podcast. That opening sequence is a lie. It is not Matty Gunner here today. Unfortunately, Mr. Gunner is under the weather, and I had a decision to make. I could either postpone this week entirely, or I could just decide to say, F it, we're going to go live, and I'll do some news bits and everything else, and we'll see how it goes. And I decided, as you can tell, obviously, I decided to go live. So welcome to this week's kind of more abbreviated Star Wars podcast. The initial plan this week was about our favorite 5 Disney-era Star Wars characters after the Skeleton Crew had wrapped up and our discussions about Jabba and where he possibly plays. But we're still going to do that, just not today. I don't want to do that without Matty. I'm sure Matty has his strong opinions, and I'm sure that you want to hear his strong opinions on said such. So instead, what I'm going to do today is just go over some of the news that dropped. Obviously, I changed the thumbnail. We had some big potential news dropping that I wanted to definitely touch base on for sure, and some little bits and tidbits along the way that also I wanted to touch base on for sure as well. So we're just going to do a short show today, depending on how long the news takes, depending on if you have any questions in the chat, because the chats are open, super chats are open. I'm an open book. I can talk about Star Wars. I can talk about pretty much anything if you want to. It's really up to you and up to me. But if this is your first time here, you can hit that like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Help us fight the evil algorithm. As far as that goes, it's really the evil empire out there sometimes. But it's an interesting time for Star Wars for sure. We have the wrapping up the Skeleton Crew. Obviously, just happened. We at this network, this channel, we really did love that show. We thought it was a wonderful state of Star Wars, right, to put out there at this time, breath of fresh air after the divisiveness of the Acolyte. It's nice to get something that was pretty well received overall, and we are entering a new phase, I believe, in Star Wars. Kind of feels like this has been a long time coming. There's not a whole lot announced for 2025, which is okay. We do have Celebration coming up, and that might change a little bit of that. Of course, we have Andor Season 2 coming up. We're going to pump into that for sure. We're going to start getting the engine running on that pretty soon. But that Celebration will happen, and who knows what's going to be announced, because we have nothing else besides Mandalorian Grogu set and Ahsoka Season 2 set. Everything else is kind of up in the air. We still have the 3 films that were announced back in the last Celebration that have yet to come to any kind of near fruition. There's been little to no word on the Rey movie besides Daisy Ridley's being cast. Some changes happening behind the scenes there, but that's not ready. Obviously, Dave Filoni's Mandoverse movie would still have to wait till the end of a lot of the other stuff before we even get to that position. We had some movement on the Mangold movie, which might potentially be filming later this year or perhaps next year, maybe one of the new ones that are come off the dockets here. But we're going to talk about that today too, because of some of the news that drops. That will be our feature piece news, the thumbnail. That's not a surprise if you saw the thumbnail. We're going to talk about that for sure. But before we get there, a few other pieces of news have dropped over the course of the past couple of days, week or so since we last chatted. So let's get right into it. The first one I want to talk about today, the Skeleton Crew showrunners talking about Jad Janawad and also the future of the show. Jad Janawad really kind of surprised a lot of people. I mentioned it point blank, one of my favorite Star Wars characters now, I'll say of all time so far. I mean, it's hard to say that with recency bias being at the front. I mean, maybe next year he'll dip back down, but as of right now, I really do think I love where this character's gone. He's very unique to Star Wars in terms of he's a Force user, he's a pirate, he's not had quite a redemption arc that any of the Star Wars fans or Star Wars villains have had. There's still that minor redemption, and that still could change in the future. We talked about that during our last review of the last episode from Skeleton Crew, but he's very unique. It's a very unique take on a character for sure. And that's what actually sparked my top favorite 5 Disney era-led Star Wars characters. We'll get to that next week, like I said. But the interesting thing, again, like I said before, what about made this character great is the kind of red herring. they basically teased him to have kind of this redemptive arc. They presented him right from the beginning as this pirate, this swindler, this con man, this selfish guy who's probably taking advantage of the kids. But they made a couple of big moments, choices with him, talking to Wim, talking to people, where it was easily set up. You could see that he would try to take advantage of the kids, but then eventually he would help the kids. And you kind of saw that route coming. And then all of a sudden it didn't happen. All of a sudden he went the other way, doubled down on being a villain. And while he was very careful not to hurt the kids, he still was very much selfish, very much in line with the pirate scheme. He was the antagonist of the story for sure. And that was actually a great choice. And so Watts and Christopher Ford, who are showrunners and directors, they talked about that as well as the future. And they said they credited Jude Law as making Jod a three-dimensional character and why that story worked. There's an interview with Entertainment Weekly. He was talking about that. And I want to say I agree with them that it worked because of Jude Law. Jude Law really put forth a great performance. And it's a great reminder, and this is kind of a hint ahead, as it were, what an A-list actor can do in a project. A lot of times you like unknowns, but this showcases put somebody in there who you know can handle something, and they can deliver a performance like the one we got, like the one Stellan Skarsgård gave in Andor, things of that nature as well. John Watts said about this one, specifically about Jod's arc in Skeleton Crew, it was really exciting following people get to the same conclusion that you got to on Reddit, being that there's going to be a redemptive arc. Everyone is waiting for that redemption arc, and Ford would always say he's not their parents. So we had that waiting, and you get a little bit nervous. You're like, should we have given him a redemption arc? But I don't know. And Ford said, we knew that the character archetype was part of Star Wars, so we wanted to play with it, and especially the whole is he a Jedi or not thing. Is he good or bad? And so our twist was this anti-twist, that he was exactly as he presented to be, seemingly. Watts went on to say, we've been having to not reveal any of that for such a long time. You're the first person we've been able to talk freely with it. Ford continued, but honestly, it would not have worked if it wasn't for Jude because of his performance and his ability to play the character. He was so invested and interested in making Jod three-dimensional. So it wasn't just I'm a villain, surprise. Even in his villainy, you can feel that it comes from a human place where he lived in this hard world. He's made the wrong decisions. He was so interested in making it great as opposed to just, I'll show up and be the villain. He worked in the backstory so much. Watts continued, when he gets to talk about how he ended up the way he did, I think that's fascinating. No villain wakes up and thinks I'm the villain. He exists in a morally gray area. He's not so one-dimensional that he would just kill the kids and run away with the gold. He's tortured by this behavior. I think that's fascinating to watch. And just because the main characters in our show are kids doesn't mean have to oversimplify those ideas. I think that's given the show hopefully layers of depth in a way. It's not a kids show, frankly. Basically, I went on and just talked about that for sure. I agree with them. I actually think now it's gone down. I was expecting the redemptive arc. I was not going to be upset with the redemptive arc. It's one of those kind of things which to me would have been predictable yet satisfying. This was unpredictable for me, and maybe the way it should go sometimes. I still hold true that there was some redemptive angles towards the end, and if they do pick up on a potential season 2, or even if Jod shows up somewhere else, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a little bit more redemption down the line. But as of right now, I think this is a great way to end his tale, at least presently. Speaking of the future, they mentioned that as well. They were talking about the future, and the abrupt ending to the finale certainly left the door open, but right now there was no news as of yet. Watts and Ford had said because the pair of them live in different cities and the other crew members living in LA were currently busy dealing with the awful wildfires, they haven't had time to properly discuss a potential renewal. However, the pair of them do have plenty of ideas in their heads for season 2 stories and would clearly love the opportunity to do more Skeleton Crew. Watts said, we have our ideas in our head for sure. We're waiting to find out what everyone else thinks, but we've always had an idea of where this could go even before we made the first season. So there's lots of potential out there, and I hope everyone sees that. We wouldn't pretend like the kids are only 6 months older if we made more. It is fun to think of them growing up and where they'd fit in the galaxy and how their world would be changed by the events of what happened in the first season. Ford continued, and interconnected-wise, how the events of the other shows would impact Ad-Aden. It doesn't have to be a cameo, because if there's historical events are happening in the galaxy, it's going to affect everyone. Watts says, yeah, their secluded planet is now officially part of a larger galaxy. So what would the ramifications of that be for it? So you just start with this big pile of amazing story prompts, and it was like it would be so much fun. I personally hope there is a season 2. I think that these guys know what they're doing in Star Wars, specifically with the style that they're shooting for. I think it worked out very well. I think there are stories to be told for all the characters in there. I'd love to see more of the kids. I definitely want to see more of Jod. Would love to see more of Smee. Would even love to see more of some of the other characters that were introduced. Pocket. Kim, You can remember the big alien who was in the spa. All those kind of characters have potential to be grown and expanded on, which is one of the reasons why it's interesting that this show did not have a big cameo in it. Like, we've kind of been ingrained in Star Wars to look for, who are they going to show us now? How is it going to connect? And we only really had Vane, which was promised a long time ago. Interestingly enough, of course, I expected more from Vane, to be honest with you. When they teased Vane running away in The Mandalorian from Gorian Shard, they said he was going to be in Skeleton Crew. I assumed he was going to be the big bad of Skeleton Crew. Like, he would be maybe like the Brutus role or whatever. But we didn't get that. We just got him kind of there, mostly in the background. Had a few throwaway lines. He really wasn't important to it. But that's the kind of connection which actually is even more impressive in a way. It shows a lot of restraint, as it were. Plenty of times you could have shown other characters. I mean, when they were going to visit Kim, that could have been somebody else that we had known. That could have been Maz Kanata. That could have been maybe even Dr. Afra. That could have been anybody, but they chose to restrain themselves and go a different direction. And the benefit of that is definitively that you can concentrate more on the characters you have. It doesn't take away from the lead characters and the kids what their story is, or Jada what his story is. It doesn't become about that cameo. I think you can do it both ways. I'm still a fan of interconnectedness. I love the connected cameos. I still am mad that we never got Hondo Anaka, quote unquote mad. I still love the show, but I wanted to get Hondo in there somewhere. This is the perfect opportunity for him. But it does let us concentrate more on the here and now and the characters that we are given. And the other side of things is when you introduce some of these new characters, all of a sudden they become the next Hondo type character or somebody who we want to see. I want to see Pocket again. I would love to see Kim again. So that kind of makes its own way in the universe, So speaking of Skeleton Crew, another bit of news that was talked about this week. Actress Yasmin Al-Masri had taken to social media and shared that she was supposed to be in Skeleton Crew as Jad Nanawud's Jedi Master. Unsurprisingly, it was not a Jedi we knew, which is what I said. It wasn't anybody we knew. Of course, technically, this story could change now that this scene never happened. I guess it could be somebody new. But the implication was that his master was not anybody we knew. And it shows that they had taped a actual scene about that. And for whatever reason, they decided not to use it. Watson 4 basically stated, kind of similarly along to the cameos, it would kind of take away from the here and now of the story. It kind of take us away from the kids' story. It kind of all becomes about that particular moment. And we didn't need it. I think it was actually much more effective to have Jad kind of throw it out there and kind of answer some questions without answering some questions. It's just kind of like it leaves it more open for future storytelling. We get to delve deeper into Jad's backstory then, perhaps. But yeah, that could be. I'm glad that she got to do it. I'm glad that she got to at least be on set, get to wear Jedi robes, and get some training and everything else. And she got to meet some cool people and everything else. She was very positive about her experience, and it was said it was very meaningful for her. I do hope she didn't get in trouble for it. It was on her personal social media. I'm hoping that it's not something that she's going to get in trouble for sharing. But either way, good for her, and I'm happy to see you there. Douglas Dubois in the chat. Hey ho, good to see you, Douglas, on this live stream day. Just going through some news and bits from Star Wars Galaxy, as it were. Excuse me a second. I get a little bit of frog in my throat. Anyway, back to the next news bit. According to Jeff Snyder, who was on the hot mic with John Roca, he made mention recently of Sigourney Weaver, who is appearing in Mandalorian Grogu. We knew that. We didn't really know what her role was. Well, he dropped a little bit of a scoop of sorts, stating that Sigourney Weaver is going to be a colonel in the New Republic and is actually a small role, which I'm glad to know beforehand. A lot of times, sometimes they have these characters are going to be in this show or in this movie, and then they're very much not in it very much. So then all of a sudden it's like, well, why do we bother getting excited about this? I kind of feel like with the plot that we know the plot is right now, at least the scooped plot was that Rod of the Hutt, as voiced by Jeremy Allen White, was on the run from either Embo and Din. Somebody hired Embo, somebody hired Din. Maybe, quite frankly, Sigourney Weaver is the person who hires Din, or perhaps who hires Embo. We don't really know. A cool tidbit from this is that her character name is Colonel Bishop. Now, if you're an Aliens fan, Alien, you know that Bishop is another connection to Alien. I mean, he could have put it on the nose and made her Colonel Ripley. That's a little bit too on the nose. But naming her Bishop gets to nod back to her past in sci-fi. Excellent, for sure. And yes, Douglas Force Center did have a great discussion about that scene yesterday. I just finished that a little bit earlier today. They always have wonderful discussions on that. I wish Matty and I could have a discussion about that right now, but unfortunately, Matty, hope you feel better for sure. Interestingly enough, they mentioned that Jeff mentioned that Sigourney Weaver, her character, like I said, being in only a few scenes, was likened to Carrie Ann Moss's role in The Acolyte, which again, some people were disappointed in, and I understand that disappointment. But Sigourney Weaver in a smaller role for Mando Grogu actually does make sense to me, comparatively, especially if she's not the villain. If she was going to be the villain, like some people kind of thought maybe was the case, well, that would be the reason why she'd be in there more. But if she's not the villain, well, then it makes sense that she'd be a kind of a smaller role. In addition to that, Snyder also revealed that Jon Favreau had contracted COVID-19 during production and had to direct a few scenes remotely with the help of Dave Filoni, first assistant director Kim Richards, and second unit director Peter Ramsey, who had worked on Ahsoka. So it's another interesting tidbit of news for sure. Nothing more about that, though. I didn't really say about that. It was just kind of interesting. Okay, one more big rumor scoop to discuss. One more big rumor to discuss at this point. My friend Christian Harloff on his channel that I work for. I produce for him on his live stream. He mentioned this to me last week, and actually said last week he was going to break it last week. So I thought we were going to talk about it on Holy Snokes last week, and then couldn't quite get his go ahead from his source. So we had to hold off on it. Revealed on Monday that Natalie Portman was going to be in discussions, or perhaps already back into the fold, for Ahsoka season 2. This is coming hot on the heels, of course, of Harloff actually reporting that Hayden Christensen would be back in a bigger role, that Ewan McGregor was coming back as Obi-Wan, and Ariana Greenblatt was coming back as young Ahsoka, and it was going to be Natalie Portman coming back as Padme, which is the one part of the piece of news I mentioned before. We talked about last week, Obi-Wan and Anakin, and Ariana definitely meant to me more Clone Wars flashbacks, because that circled in with Ewan McGregor had talking about on a concept where he would like to take the armor, or wear the armor of Clone Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi. Makes a lot of sense to me. So also if that was true and he was in place to do this, maybe that's why he discussed it, because he was looking forward to it. Having Padme involved, you could still have Clone Wars flashbacks for sure, but obviously Padme wasn't as involved in a lot of the war aspects, especially with Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, but they could add things to it. But it did make me wonder if there was potentially a world between world in play still. I do know that's always in the back of my mind. We do have the Mortis gods there. We do have Baylan Skoll. His arc was leading towards the Mortis gods. Would that be in line with that? Would we get Natalie Portman coming back, or an alternate version of Natalie Portman? I don't know necessarily. I still tend to lean towards the fact that they'll do Clone Wars stuff. That seems to be what was exciting in Ahsoka season 1 and what people really responded to. Even those who didn't love the series all seem to love that episode with Anakin. So getting that back together makes sense on a fan standpoint, as well as, to me, it is something that really helps kind of bridge the gap between young Ahsoka and older, more stoic Ahsoka, as it were. So I think those are kind of a win-win for me. You get Natalie Portman back in the fold. You get some young Clone Wars scenes in there that help really push Ahsoka's character forward, which is the main reason for the show, really. You can't rely completely on nostalgia, but you can have nostalgia that drives forward the narrative of the current show. I think this can do that. I think Anakin did do that in the first season, and it wasn't just a cash grab. It wasn't just it wasn't just for the fans and nostalgia. It just happened to work in both fashions. So just to be quite clear, Star Wars Newsnet the next day denied the rumor. They actually published an article with Christians being the sources that possibility being happened. Then they checked with one of their own sources, and their sources said that it was not true. So this could potentially be poppycock, as it were. I like to discuss the rumors anyway. I think they're fun discussion pieces. I think sometimes people can get too hyped and into it, and they get really disappointed when it doesn't happen. That's what we get with all these scoops recently, and all the directors and films being quote unquote announced and then all of a sudden not happening, when in truth Lucasfilm hasn't announced too many things. So it's hard and they take the brunt of that kind of a negativity for announcing things that don't happen. Well, they're not announcing them. They never announced this. So Natalie Portman never announced to come back. So some people get too into it and everything else. For me, I always look at these scoops with a big, a big table of salts, basically, and say, okay, if it happens, great. What would that mean? I like to take a look at those things. What would that mean for our story? What would that mean coming forward? But when it doesn't happen, I understand being disappointed, but I don't like make it the end of the world, and I don't start chucking negativity anybody's way, which is an important way to approach this, in my estimation. As far as this particular one, like I said, Star Wars Newsnet has denied this rumor from their source. I talked to Christian again, talking about Star Wars Newsnet's denial, and he is standing firm that his source is still saying that, at the very least, that she was in discussions. He still believes she is, as of last time I talked to him. So hopefully, either way, we're going to find out either way soon. It could be that they're waiting for contracts to be signed. Again, she's in talks, so we're not going to hear it officially either way for quite a while. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if Celebration comes along and we see Hayden, Ewan, Natalie, and Ariana on the stage together with Rosario Dawson. It would be great. I love to see Padme for just pure selfish. I love Padme, and getting more Padme stories is fun. And again, as long as it does advance the story, I'm here for it. So, all right, one piece of news before our final topic of discussion. Marvel Comics has announced a new flagship title. This is something I've been waiting for news from. They had the Star Wars flagship title that ran alongside Darth Vader, that took place between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And they had the reboot or number one that took place between Empire and Return of the Jedi. And then afterwards, they've been doing this maxi series of the Battle of Jakku in runs of 4-issue limited series. They had 3 limited series they were running weekly at one point, which was really kind of cool. And they're just finishing up with that last one now. But I was kind of worried that this was kind of taking the place of the flagship title, because I think the flagship title is important to have. And my fears have been put to rest. Marvel has decided the same thing, and they have now announced a new flagship title to start to debut in May of 2025, and it's going to take place in the New Republic era. So it's Star Wars #1 again in the New Republic era, which is exciting to me, because we're finally getting past the original trilogy era, which we've kind of mined a lot of stories from. And this is a very open-winded area at this point, as far as the new canon goes. Obviously, EU, the old expanded universe, has a ton of material in here, but the new canon doesn't. Obviously, we have Mandalorian. That's its own thing. This is the main people from the original trilogy. What's Luke doing? What's Lando doing? What's Han doing? What's young Ben Solo doing, who appears, spoiler alert, appears at the end of the Battle of Jakku in a kind of an epilogue situation? What's young Ben Solo doing? What's all these characters that we know and love, and we have very little understand and the Force Awakens. So it's going to be interesting for sure. I think it's going to be written by Alex Segura. It's going to be written by Alex Segura, who did write the Battle of Jakku series, which I found to be fine. I didn't love it necessarily. It kind of was a little rushed at times, but I think with a more open-ended world source, not having to worry about trying to tie it in with the books, of course, by Chuck Wendig, and getting a little more of an open area, that could be good for this book. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen to it, because that's one of 3 ongoing series we got coming up from Star Wars, all of which I'm excited about. Mark Guggenheim, of course, is doing Jedi Knights, which I've heard. They did an interview on Star Wars Explained the other day, the 3 of them, Guggenheim, Secura, and Charles Soule, which is a great interview. Go check it out for sure. And it's going to be an ongoing book in the vein of Marvel 2-in-1. We're going to get a lot of Jedi team-ups that we wouldn't necessarily have seen before, or we have seen, or maybe not much of. I guess there's a Dooku and Yaddle connection at one point. I guess the first issue is going to have a bunch of Jedi in it, and there's some issue with Qui-Gon. That's the central mystery. But there is going to be an overlying arc kind of involved. But it's an interesting place for sure. We have had the High Republic to showcase where the Jedi were, as far as like at the height of their powers and their height of their influence before the fall. which is definitely filled a gap in here. But this is kind of one of those in between gaps where you have the Jedi still at the height of their power before the fall for the most part, but it is Jedi we know and love already as well. So we get to see more of Qui-Gon, get to see more of Kia Di Mundi, get to see more Yoda at his height there. Height being a pun absolutely intended there. But Dooku and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, a lot of fun to be had there for sure. So I'm excited about that. And finally, of course, the other big comic ongoing that I'm excited about is Charles Soule's Legacy of Vader. Charles Soule, of course, has done Darth Vader runs and very well received Darth Vader run. Now he's going to take that same approach to Kylo Ren. And I guess we're going to hit a lot of the same planets that Vader went to before. This is really built from that Darth Vader run. But it takes place between 8 and 9, which is an interesting time for Kylo Ren to see what happens with them. I do think it's a kind of a cool angle to tackle. It's a very, very unknown era at this point. We don't really know much of what's going on. He did tease some big moments for Kylo Ren that he thought might get some pushback on from the story group. They let it happen, so we'll have to see where that goes. Yeah, one of the specifically, he mentioned he wanted to, after dealing with Luke, he wanted to have more dealings with the Jedi. So he hunts down a possible Order 66 survivor, which at this time, you never hear about that at this point, because this is well past it. Obviously, the Jedi is going to be older, but depending on what kind of Jedi it is, it could be someone who's long lived, and who knows. Now, I know I hear that some people, I can already hear some people saying, oh, another Order 66 survivor. How many of them are possible? But at the same time, we're still looking at like, what, 1% of them have still survived at this point, potentially? That still means that Order 66 was still pretty effective. But I'm looking forward to that as well. So comic books are definitely looking up. Obviously, you also got the High Republic stuff, which is coming to a close this year with the big book ending in the summertime, early summertime. I don't have the release date off the top of my head. I'm doing my reread, and I'm on Midnight Horizon now, so I'm about to enter phase 3. I have a couple of comics left and a couple of books left to reread there. Or get into phase 3, which I haven't even touched because I decided to do my reread before that. So I'm waiting on that still for sure. But yeah, exciting news in the publishing world. Again, that's something that's going to come back on a Celebration. At some point, Matty and I are going to have to do a Celebration preview. I'm not going to Celebration, but he is. We'll have a preview on what we expect to see, what we hope to see announced, and hopefully the big moments that will happen and take place. So, all right, last bit of news there. It's the one from the thumbnail. This is the big one. Ryan Gosling. The Ryan Gosling A-list superstar has interest in, as in talks to be in, a Star Wars movie. In fact, the aforementioned unannounced still so far Shawn Levy's Star Wars movie. Now, this comes hot off the tails of a couple different rumors from before. There were rumors before that Shawn Levy had obviously pitched a Star Wars movie. It was going to be in a unrelated timeline to the Skywalkers, standalone movie. It was going to be potentially without anyone. Then there was maybe rumors that Rey could appear. Of course, like the great Ken Knapsack on Force Center said, there's rumors are Rey's going to be in every piece of Star Wars. I don't think she's been tabbed for the Mangold 25,000 years ago one, but everything else she's probably been at least tabbed in rumor-wise to be potentially involved. But at the end of the day, that was all a piece of news for Shawn Levy. The other piece of news from Shawn Levy, which I had talked about recently, a scooper had sent to me, was that he was holding a window open in September of this year or October of this year to potentially start on his Star Wars film. Start filming his Star Wars film, I should say. He's been working with Jake Tropper for about a year now on a script. So we're going to see where that comes into play for sure. But this piece of news actually might kick this into overdrive. And in fact, that's what the Hollywood Reporter article says. Gosling's specific interest in doing a Star Wars movie has pushed the project to the front of the director's schedule. So this negotiations started late in the game and are supposedly the reason why Levy is now prioritizing Star Wars over another project in development, which is a boy band movie starring Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman for Paramount. Now, quite frankly, that I still want to see as well. But you know what, Sean, Star Wars needs a little bit more right now. Give Ryan Reynolds a little bit of time to sort out the issues he has right now. And then come back to that, because that's a topic I'd like to see. I think it'd be hilarious. But it also makes sense. We need a Star Wars film in production. All of a sudden, we need to see Ryan Gosling in a Star Wars film. And Disney wants to see that too. We need Ryan Gosling to discuss the Ryan Gosling. This we do need him, right? Where is Matty when this breaks? God darn it, Matty. Now, we talked about this before previously, and I talked about this earlier in the episode when talking about Judd and Elwood and Jude Law. There is a frame of mind that a lot of Star Wars fans want unknowns in their leading roles. Want unknown actors play roles because they want characters that aren't going to take them out of Star Wars. They're going to need, or they're going to need them to really envelop the Star Wars role. And I was kind of like that for a bit until I realized two things. A, we've had people in the past who were well known playing roles and didn't take me out. Samuel L. Jackson playing Mace Windu did not take me out. Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor weren't unknown. Christopher Lee, not unknown. Benicio del Toro in Last Jedi did really well. I thought about that, and I also thought about Jude Law and Jod Nalwood. And as much as I love Jod Nalwood in this role, Jude Law is what made it work. And it just keeps reminding you that, oh, Jude Law does great work because he's a great actor. So whether he's famous or not, a celebrity or not, what you want to know, Ryan Gosling is a great actor. A decent actor, a really high chopped actor. So why wouldn't you want him in your Star Wars film? I also feel that he is the kind of actor who can disappear enough into a role. He's not like a Gary Oldman where he will go completely inside, but he has done enough where he can definitely take on a different kind of role and make it work and not make you think about Ryan Gosling in a way that perhaps someone like a Ryan Reynolds couldn't, or Bruce Willis couldn't. Those kind of actors who play Dwayne The Rock Johnson couldn't, because they play themselves, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it wouldn't work for Star Wars. Ryan Gosling, he can fit in very well, I have a feeling. I have to talk to Matty next week about what he thinks and about what he feels and what we think he should play. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities out there. I think if he's going to play the lead, I think he'll be the good guy. I hope he's not in an Alien set or anything like that. I don't want to say a Jeremy Allen White situation where he's voicing a Hutt. I want to see Ryan Gosling as Ryan Gosling looks-wise in a role. He could be a scoundrel. He could be a Han Solo type. He could be a Jedi. He could, depending on where this takes place. If it takes place before Order 66, he could be an older Padawan, potentially, maybe a dropped-out Padawan. He could play someone like a Jod Nalwood, a Force user that was on the run for whatever reason. It could be a lot of different possibilities, and I'd love to see it, especially because mainly Ryan Gosling has talent. Blade Runner 2049 is one of my favorite movies of the decade, of that particular decade. And part of the reason, besides Denis Villeneuve's perfect directing, is Gosling's performance. He plays that role so well, a very stoic performance until the emotions are needed. He plays off Harrison Ford very well. So he can do a sci-fi role. He would fit that aesthetic very well. And he could throw in a lot of different possibilities. I can potentially, off the top of my head, see The Nice Guys meets Blade Runner 2049, like the aesthetics of Blade Runner 2049 with maybe the buddy comedy aspect of an adventure on the run potentially. I don't know. It's very interesting to see first of all, but more importantly, I think it's important that Ryan Gosling is going to make this film cook. We're actually going to get a movie instead of being in production or in development for a long time. This movie is actually going to make it to production, and that's what I'm hoping for. And I'm wondering if it's all the stories have been basically that he's in talks. But usually, if it gets this far, it's pretty close to happening. A lot of times, I feel like the beats, the Hollywood Reporter types will say this, and it'll be basically almost a done deal. They don't leak it at that point unless it's that close to being done. We might not have a signed contract situation yet, but they're probably pretty close to it. That's my own particular prediction. So I would be disappointed, yes, and I would be surprised if this doesn't come together. And then we'll have more to talk about for sure at that point. When that happens, we'll have a bigger piece, predictions, all that kind of jazz for sure. One prediction I will make now, though, is I do think everything going around in his head. I think Sean Levy's movie is entering production, entering filming in September. It's going to be a big announcement at Celebration, and they're going to learn. They are going to learn from last time. Last time they announced 3 movies, and they were all very vague with no release dates, nothing else in place except for who the director was, what the basic concept of the movie was, and that was it. This time they're going to come through. We're going to get a Mando Grogu teaser or trailer, Mando Grogu panel. That's obviously actually happening, and we're definitely going to get, I think, Sean Levy's going to step on that stage, hopefully with Ryan Gosling, they're going to say, this is the movie we're filming, hopefully, maybe with a title. And they're going to say, oh, and we're starting filming in September. So it's that kind of definitive. So they don't have a situation where they make an announcement and it doesn't come to fruition. So, all right, that'll do it for us, folks. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for appearing on this live broadcast, this quick and dirty live broadcast. We will see you next week when Matty returns, and that will be, again, favorite 5 characters from Disney era Star Wars. Maybe the force be with you, and we'll see you next time there. Peace out, everybody.
May the force be with you always.